The sentence landed before the door closed. He heard the recording. My throat tightened as if someone had turned down the volume on the air. The kitchen light hummed. My father folded the laundry slowly, like a judge rehearsing a verdict. When he shut the front door behind him, the click sounded final. No coming back through that sound. I had been careful, or at least I thought I was. We all have our schemes. Quick fixes, small lies, the optimism that a deadline will forgive itself. Mine was a plan stitched together from midnight panic and bad decisions. The chemistry exam had been brutal. Formulas I didn't know and a curve, so steep I felt dizzy on the wrong side of it. I told myself a one-time shortcut wouldn't ruin anything. I told myself it was just strategy. Then I sent a voice message to Jake, a half-brag, half-confession that included a detail it shouldn't have. I slipped some answers to Ava, I said, laughing too loud. We handed them under the table. Nobody will ever know. Jake sent it back to a group chat like a trophy. The audio jumped from phone to phone until it landed where it should never have, in my dad's listening ear. He was at work that afternoon, helping a contractor with a homeowner's app. The contractor scrolled a thread and a careless thumb-tapped play. The track of my voice filled the room, small and casual and sharp as glass. Later that night, my dad came home early, and the rest was the slow motion that follows being caught. I expected an explosion. Instead, the shock was quiet. That made it worse. "We'll follow the school's procedure," he said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. There was a ledger in his expression where decisions had been weighed and logged. "You're going to have to face them." School faced me like a second courtroom. Mr. Davies called it a disciplinary meeting, but the word didn't soften the shape of it. The principal sat with his palms folded. Ms. Harper looked at me like a teacher who'd had a student slip through her fingers before. There was the evidence, the audio, the testimony from Ava, who said she'd been handed a paper, and a string of messages that made the timeline complete. They read me the policies on academic honesty like someone reading a will. When the principal asked if I had anything to say, my voice sounded small in the room. "I made a selfish choice," I said. "I wanted a safety net, and I made it out of other people." That felt honest for the first time. The suspension was a week conditional on completion of a restorative plan, an apology in class, 30 hours of community service, mandatory counseling with the school counselor, and a reflective essay on ethics. I expected anger or pity. I got a list and a calendar. At home, the consequences were as carefully measured as the school's. My father drew up a schedule that looked like a miniature contract. No driving for 3 months, phone privileges limited, weekend shifts at the local hardware store, my portion of the college fund reduced unless I earned it back by working. "You can't have everything," he said. "You need to earn trust back the way it was lost, slow and visible." The first night felt like living in a house waiting for lightning. My mother stared at the couch cushion where my phone used to be, and then at the TV remote that sat untouched. She didn't lecture. She made sandwiches and placed a stack of envelopes on the table, an apology letter template, volunteer sign-up sheets, a list of counseling appointments. There was a logic to it I couldn't argue with. Anger would have been easier. This procedural silence was heavier. Detention was less dramatic than I'd imagined. The library clock ticked in a monotone rhythm while I shelved books and filled out forms for the community center. The kids there were younger, unaware of the specifics that had landed me there. They needed help with math, crayons, patience, little things that mattered. Folding chairs, sorting donated coats, labeling canned goods. The work didn't scold me. It eroded the edges of my ego quietly by giving my hands something honest to do. The apology in class was the kind of mortification you can only survive if you know you'll live to tell the tale later. Standing at the front of the room, the fluorescent lights made everyone look both smaller and more glaringly real. I told them the truth. What I'd done, why I'd done it, and what I hoped to do to make amends. A few students smirked. A few nodded. Ava didn't come. She had moved seats and kept her eyes glued to a notebook, but Lena, who'd seen me before I made every dumb call, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod while I spoke. Small human gestures sometimes heal more than policy. Counseling was where the truth started to feel like a tool instead of punishment. Ms. Jordan, the counselor, didn't berate me. She asked how the pressure had felt, what my nights looked like, which habits had led to the lie. We mapped my procrastination into a timeline and then redesigned the habits that created harm. Time boxing, short incremental deadlines, accountability, partners. These were the mechanical things that made panic less poisonous. She made me write a letter not to the school, but to myself, explaining what I'd do differently if I could turn back time. Reading it aloud in her office was like watching someone else getting a second chance and realizing it was mine if I worked for it. My weekend shifts at the hardware store were a kind of penance and a reality check. I lifted bags of mulch, stepped lightly around pallets, and learned to answer the same questions again and again. Do you need help? No, I'm okay, I used to say. Now I asked for help and gave it. The manager watched me stack screws and carry paint and eventually recruited me to help customers pick the right tools. Money came in slow, honest increments that felt heavier than the glow of my screen. My dad would sometimes slide by on a break and watch me from the shade, and once in a while he'd nod like someone who was reading progress in real time. There were nights I wanted to rage and scream and slam doors. Mostly I sat and listened. Conversations with my parents turned into practice sessions in restraint. They asked questions. I answered without flinching. Why did you think it was okay? My mother asked one evening as I scrubbed the sink. Because I felt incapable of being the person I wanted, I said. I was afraid to fail and I took the shortcut. Her hands were steady while mine shook. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's what you do with your fear, she said, the ledger on. The kitchen counter tracked my work. Hours at the hardware store, community center shifts, counseling appointments attended. They didn't erase the misstep, but each checked box felt like a small deposit. My father extended small privileges back slowly, a supervised drive to the market, then an errand to pick up paint, then the right to borrow the car for a doctor's appointment. Nothing was automatic. Everything required a demonstration. The hardest thing was earning back friendship. Some relationships frayed beyond repair. People who'd tossed jokes about shortcuts suddenly treated me like an item in a cautionary tale, but a handful held on. Jake stopped posting in the group chat for a week and then messaged, "Not cool, man, but you paid. Don't do it again." His message was a hinge. It opened the door to normalcy if I kept showing up honestly. Ava and I had a long, awkward conversation at the lockers. Her voice was steady. You put me in a stupid position. I said I understood, and I meant it. Repair didn't happen in grand gestures, but in showing up consistently. Study groups where I did the work, texts that weren't flippant, being present, when she needed a partner for lab work. Months later, the school decided my suspension could be lifted earlier because I'd completed my hours and shown consistent attendance in counseling. The principal shook my hand at the meeting and said, "We saw you taking responsibility. Keep that pattern." The words didn't feel like a pat on the head. They felt like an assignment to live up to. The final test came not from adults, but from myself. In a later semester, I faced a difficult biology exam. The old fear sat in my gut like a stone, the same one that had once pushed me to make the wrong choice. I breathed, texted Ms. Ramirez, my study buddy, 2 hours before the test, and told her I needed a quick review. We sketched out the major processes and then went for a walk. During the exam, when the impulse to shortcut flickered, I remembered the ledger on the kitchen counter and the way my father had folded the laundry, the quiet gravity of consequences. I turned the corner on the question instead of ducking it. There was no triumphant montage. There were instead small proofs. A grade that reflected work rather than luck. A smile from my mother when I showed her a completed project. My father, asking casually whether I wanted to head to the store with him, and then listening when I answered. Trust was back in motion, not all the way returned, but moving. The ledger had become less a list of my crimes and more a record of my repair. 1. Evening. Months after the recording that started it all, my father set a mug of coffee beside me and said quietly, "You made a mistake. You fixed it in the only way that matters, by doing the work." He didn't say it as absolution, but as a recognition. I sat with the cup between my hands and felt the warmth through the ceramic. There's no way out of a mistake except through it. The route isn't pretty. It's full of small, repetitive tasks that look more like discipline than drama. In the end, I learned that punishment without a path to repair is just punishment. My parents built a path and made me walk it. I didn't like every step. I learned to like the route because it taught me how to carry a load without hiding it. Dad had heard everything. That first night, there had been no way out. But there was a way forward, long, quiet, and honest, and that's the one I chose.